And Paul, you can start the recording as well.
It started.
Great. Can I start now, Carlos?
Yeah, go ahead.
And okay, we can get started now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest of these webinars organized by the Friends of Socialist China and the International Manifesto Group. As many of you will know, Friends of Socialist China is a platform based on supporting the People's Republic of China and promoting understanding of Chinese socialism. You will find it at www.socialistchina.org, where you can also sign up for their newsletter. The International Manifesto Group, for its part, discusses the fast-changing political and geopolitical economy of the world order with members from around the world, and a manifesto entitled Through Pluripolarity to Socialism, which you can find at www.internationalmanifesto.org, where you can read it, sign it, and also, if you want to volunteer, donate, etc. My name is Radhika Desai. I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group, and I will be moderating this event. At a time when bombs continue to raise on Gaza mercilessly, when even something as simple as a ceasefire seems beyond reach, let alone a lasting peace, when the US is intensifying the conflict over Ukraine with sort of every event that passes, when the US saber rattling against China grows ever more deafening, and when US military spending is now being estimated at $1.5 trillion per annum, and the economic disruption of these wars intensifies, making the critical international agreements we need to address things like climate change more distant than ever, peace has never been more urgent. What should become clear from what our panelists will have to say today is that lasting peace, not this or that ceasefire or withdrawal, but sustainable and sustained peace, cannot be achieved unless there is solid regime change in the United States, which is the single most important purveyor of war in the world today. And this regime change can only happen when the people of that country wrest power from the unproductive, senile, neoliberal, financialized, warmongering capitalist corporations that hold it today, and take it in their own hands to run their country and its economy and its political institutions, and of course, its foreign policy in their own interest and not in those of these corporations. A key element in this process, therefore, will have to be people-to-people contacts. Only such contacts can pull the wool that war profiteers have placed on the eyes of the people of the United States, the West, and much of the world, which is to international relations in the world. The first coming from a declining capitalist West, which relies on war, and the other coming from a variety of countries, but where China has been in the lead, standing for cooperation, international law, and development. This is the message that must reach ordinary people. And with this webinar, we are making our own little contribution to helping that process. So let's get that message out, beginning with our wonderful speakers that we've got, peace delegates who are reporting back on China and helping build solidarity and opposing the Cold War. So we will begin with Lee Siew-hin. Lee Siew-hin, sorry, one second. Lee Siew-hin is a longtime Chinese-American immigrant worker, anti-war and social justice activist. He's national coordinator of the National Immigrant Solidarity Network, NISN, a coalition of immigrants' rights, labor, human rights, religious, and student activist organizations from across the United States. He travels frequently between China and the United States, organizing solidarity tours as well as medical solidarity projects. So, Lee Siew-hin, please go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot.
Yes.
Again, thank you for your kind and detailed introductions. Greeting and good evening. from Hong Kong, China, from my hometown, from the other part of the earth. I have been in trouble between work and activism project between US, China, and Europe, now also include the Middle East. My main purpose is to bring Chinese community activists, grassroots activists from working class, brokers, academias, and social workers to work and introduce them with different activists around the world, vice versa, to help US activists to meet with grassroots Chinese activists to hope to build a binational international solidarity from a common cause, from anti-war social justice to building a long-lasting peace and solidarity between two countries, also around the world. That is our purpose. When I started this project decades ago, and I thought we were going to start to do the very simple, maybe a grassroots organizing. Turned out to be, it was not the case. What we have been doing most of the time, even until today, is information sharing. And because of language difference and we have several thousands of members and supporters across the countries, but 99% doesn't speak English. And so we need to work with US or maybe other activists from around Europe, around the world who speak English, how to communicate better. And that is we've been doing quite a lot. The color revolution has been affecting around the world, includes Hong Kong, my hometown, as well as Xinjiang, as well as Taiwan. They've been using this as a co-interpro to mobile organizing a local so-called resistance or maybe an activist, really just a CIA plan to launch violent protests to want to overthrow the local government. At the end, that will be going to be a destabilized country, my country, China, and then the region to the imperialist domination dreams forever. 2019, the US government spent millions of dollars from NED to CIA, organizing and training the so-called democracy student activists in Hong Kong to launch the so-called Occupy Central and the Umbrella Revolution, the so-called, and the right-wing cross-border police almost took over the Hong Kong Special Administrative Government, which is part of China, but they failed. That's the reason U.S. is very infuriated against the current the new Special Administrative Government, which is not going to be listen to U.S. dominance. The same thing will happen in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is part of our country, and there's dozens multi-ethnic groups living there, but they want to use in particular the so-called Uyghur issues, and then there's such a thing as the myth about the so-called concentration camp and genocide in Xinjiang that want to putting all these kind of sanctions against Xinjiang cottons and other products, and also political pressure that hopefully that's going to have some kind of destabilizing situation that can be leading to what they dream of, like a Syrianization of Xinjiang that will become the civil war mass killing, and then destabilizing China to the imperialist dominations. But it didn't happen. It failed. That's the reason U.S. is so furious. What China-U.S. already want to do is going to build a bridge to communicate, to build an activist solidarity, education, and educated community between U.S. and China, that what is the reality happen in China, and then to show the myth busting what happening in China to the U.S. activists, as well as the Chinese activists myth busting them what is happening in US, because there's so many weird myths in China circulating. They said that the US is a corruption free and a free medication, a free medical service, and even they said that like you can just working as a janitor to buy a $1 million house in 5 years. I know this is crazy, but they have that kind of myth building there. It's part of the color revolutions. So so we have been doing different type of activist works between project, between the education campaign, the book publishing, to delegation. The most notable one has been we have been doing dozen delegation between China and the US, include Sarah Flanders and Carlos Martinez, Danny Haifan, and Dean Knight has been joining our delegation in the past. Also went to Xinjiang for fact-finding missions for the last couple of years. And then we also published a book, Capitalism Ventilators, and also documentary and vaccines and sanctions, with the pro bono support from the Chinese activists as well as American US activists. We want to continue to do this on 2024 because what happened right now in Gaza, what happened right now in Palestine, the U.S. sponsoring Israel to genocide the Palestinian people. They want to repeat these things again to hopefully replicate this in China. They want to doing this kind of so-called Taiwan independence again and again, or maybe another round of Xinjiang sanctions that hopefully they might be they're going to have a terrorist attacks happen. That kind of things we want to stop. We want to build, and also there's a movement. I know that there's have been we heard that there's even on the anti-Zionist movement and then support the Palestinian resistance movement. They have been has a certain section that also the so-called supporting the Xinjiang independent. This is a toxic. We need to communicate and educate activists from around the world. It's not correct, and this is not the way we should going to build solidarity, and that is a CIA conspiracy. We want to build this, and we want to work with our community activists around the world to build a solidarity, peace, and unity. 世界人民大团结万岁! Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee Siew-hin. That was really very important and interesting. Our next speaker will be Charles Xu. Charles is a writer, researcher, and speaker from the Chao Collective, and he speaks for the Chao Collective. The Chao Collective is a diaspora Chinese media organization created to challenge, it's a collective rather, created to challenge US imperialist narratives about the People's Republic of China. So Charles, I hope you're here, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Radhika. Would you mind enabling screen sharing real quick?
Yes, of course. Just give me half a
Thank you.
second. Where are you, Charles? Oh, what's the name? I don't see you here. Charles, where are you? Okay, let me. Here you are. Okay. And make you co-host. Okay. There you go.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. All right. Hello, everyone. So as Radhika mentioned, my name is Charles Xu. I'm here with the Chao Collective. And unlike, I think, probably most of my fellow speakers, I did not actually participate in a formal organized peace delegation to China. So rather, I will be sort of presenting some reflections from my personal family trip to China last October, which, as you know, you might expect, the itinerary was not entirely political in nature, right? But where I could, I did manage to string together some visits to sites of historical and political importance, and so I'll be presenting my reflections on those in a sequence that's not chronological, but that hopefully makes sense. So to that end, let's see. Yeah, so I'll start with where I was staying. My family was there to visit my grandparents for the occasion of my grandfather's 90th birthday. And so we actually stayed with them. This is the daytime and nighttime view from their apartment, basically. It's located in a xiaoqu or a micro district. They've been living there for several decades, and it's been a sort of stable community over that time, which has centered on their danwei or their old work unit. This has been sort of a durable form of small community building during this entire period of great transition in China, and it's a testament to sort of the broader commitment to livability, to making this community in Shanghai a true as they call it, a 15-minute district or 15-minute community life circle. This is a concept that's been recently rolled out. You can see here that it's highlighted in the Urban Planning Exhibition Center, also in Shanghai. And yeah, it's the idea essentially that all individual and communal needs are met within sort of a 15-minute travel time. And this Urban Planning Exhibition Center, it covers plenty of future-oriented developments, green planning, and the so-called sequence of new cities that are being built up around Shanghai. But it also looks to the past of how Shanghai was built out in a very interesting way, in a way that really illustrates party leadership. In particular, the preservation of historic sites is very well integrated into this. And the foremost among them in historical terms in Shanghai itself is, of course, the founding Congress of the Communist Party of China. So there's a little, mock-up of that here. And then, of course, that was part of my actual itinerary from the beginning. So here's some photos from the museum that was built there recently in 2021 to mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of the CPC. You see on the left, pretty much all of the attendees at the founding Congress. And I think something that's worth noting about how this is presented is that it's very honest about the divergent trajectories of a lot of the figures involved, right? It's a very detailed history, and it's honest about the fact that, not all of these figures went on necessarily to become paragons of revolutionary virtue per se. On the left-hand side here, you see the two co-founders, or the two initial leaders of the Communist Party, Li Dazhao and Chen Dushu. And, the latter of those is recognized today as a flawed figure, right, for having later gone down a Trotskyist route. But he's still honored for his revolutionary contributions. On the right-hand side, the plaques on the wall do note that, in fact, two of the founding members of, or the founding attendees of the Congress went on to join the Japanese collaborationist regime of Wang Jingwei, right? So that history is presented in its full complexity and contradictions in a way that I thought was quite admirable. Also in Shanghai, or Shanghai was home for most of his career to the esteemed left-wing writer Lu Xun. And so there's a whole sort of park and museum dedicated to him there. In symbolic terms, you see how this presents a portrait of him that was sort of made up out of individual, illustrations of various facets of his life, his work, of the broad movements of the Chinese masses that he gave voice to, right? And his tomb is also located in Shanghai in a very picturesque park. You have this inscription by Mao himself over the tomb. This park was also notably the site of an act of anti-Japanese resistance by a Korean migrant, which is also commemorated there with a memorial garden. And really the memorialization of the anti-Japanese resistance suffuses many locations in Shanghai. Like, for example, there's this classical garden dating all the way back to the Ming Dynasty, Guyi Garden, which we visited, which itself was by no means left physically untouched by this episode, but in a very symbolic way, I think. This is a pavilion in this garden that symbolically had its northeast corner chopped off after the 1931 occupation of the northeast provinces of Manchuria by Japan, in symbolism of that. And then at the ends of the other three corners, you have these fists, right, that were installed to represent the anti-Japanese resistance. Another episode very particular to Shanghai, which is of great relevance today during this period, was the fact that it was host as well to around 20,000 Jewish refugees from the Holocaust from all over Europe, or all over Nazi-occupied Europe. This museum is very interesting. Here are just two parts of its exterior. There's a wall of names of at least 13,000 of those refugees. And a particular memorial to Jakob Rosenfeld, who was an Austrian Jewish doctor who, after going into exile in Shanghai, went on to actually join the Communist Party of China and to rise to the rank of general in the Northeast People's Liberation Army. Very interesting life trajectory there. For me, as a member of the Chinese diaspora, one particular story as well memorialized in Shanghai that's of particular relevance is that of Qian Shuisen, who came to the United States originally on a Boxer Rebellion Indemnity scholarship, went on to become one of the pioneers of rocketry, and during the 30s, right? And then after 1949 was essentially hounded by McCarthyist persecution. He was put under house arrest for 5 years and then deported to China, where he vowed never to set foot again in the United States, and in fact went on to become the father of the Chinese space and ballistic missile program. So there's a large museum there honoring him, and it shows not just his technical achievements, but also the seriousness of his commitment to the study of Marxist philosophy. So on the right-hand side here, you see his personal copies of Dialectics of Nature by Engels, as well as On Practice and On Contradiction by Mao. Also of personal significance is that he took an academic trajectory fairly similar to mine, in that he attended MIT and then Caltech. So those are his diplomas from there. It's part of the reason why he is a figure of so much interest to me in particular. Yes, so that was a smattering of the sort of places I visited in Shanghai, mostly solo. And then there was a leg of our trip, which went through Anhui province, and this was sort of more rural in nature. This is a village called Tangmo, which today has transitioned to a model of sort of sustainable tourism that's very much rooted in the sort of traditional artistic and craft making activities of its population in a way that helps to sort of reintegrate younger generations into the village, so it doesn't sort of die out, right, with the older generation. So I thought it was very interesting. And yes, all this said, the bulk of my travels to these sites of particular political interest for me were solo, because much as I appreciated the rotating cast of relatives who were paying host to us, a lot of them came from the generation that, as the Xiuhin mentioned in his presentation, came of age in the reform period, right, and have a lot of I would say positive illusions about the United States, are not necessarily ideologically committed to the vision of communism. And so, I decided to take a solo leg of my trip to Beijing in order to put myself back in the company of communists. And so this is me with Marco Fernandez and Ting Chak of Dongshan News and Tricontinental. We had a very extensive chat in particular about the uphill struggle that is there to re-embed a sort of socialist values into the art world in particular, right? Which has undergone extensive cultural liberalization. And, there are signs of this sort of slowly creeping out, not necessarily in organized fashion, but on the left-hand side here, we can see this is a photo that I took at the M50 Arts District in Shanghai at a studio by a bamboo craftsperson. So everything here is made completely of bamboo. You can see in the center, there's a hammer and sickle there, right? Just embedded among the other designs. And that said, it's in the popular sectors, right, that the attachment to the ideal of communism is, I think, a much more visible in nature. And so, here on the right-hand side is one of the hutongs, one of these traditional neighborhood alleys of Beijing, and you can see that very much in evidence there. Just some, remaining, some points of interest from the Beijing leg of my trip. I only had 2 days there, so there was a lot that I couldn't see. But here's a memorial to the May 4th movement of 1919, which is a great sort of anti-imperialist uprising, objecting to the transfer of Chinese territory from Germany to Japan after World War I, sorry. And one of the founding impetuses for the Communist Party of China. And I want to conclude, I'm actually going to skip through this just because everyone has seen Tiananmen. I want to conclude with sort of 2 locations in Beijing as well that speak to its attachment to national unity and to the integration of China and all of its multi-ethnic diversity, right? One is the Yonghe Lama Temple, which is the largest Tibetan Buddhist temple outside of Tibet itself. You can see, the commitment to an ecumenical and multi-ethnic and multilingual China, just embedded here on the left-hand side on that sign. It's written in Chinese, Manchu, Mongolian, and Tibetan. And on the right-hand side, you can see an illustration of Mao Zedong visiting that exact same location, right? That same door. This is part of a museum exhibit there, which really illustrates how this temple has promoted sort of the expansion of Tibetan Buddhism outside of Tibet, and really the extensive two-way interaction, right, between Tibet and the rest of China over the course of centuries. And I want to conclude with, let's see, when are these pictures going to come? Yes, there's also a small square called Alishan in Beijing, which essentially is dedicated to Taiwan, right? As you can see from the outline on the right, it's very close to a Taiwan Guild Hall, which has the statue outside of essentially 5 Taiwanese students and officials petitioning the emperor in 1895 not to transfer sovereignty of Taiwan from China to Japan, right, after the First Sino-Japanese War. And this is essentially a symbol of how long there has been this patriotic pro-unification element in Taiwan, right? And I want to wrap up with that essentially because we at Chao Collective are proud to have recently released an extensive timeline and resource list on Taiwan, on the pro-unification left, on various elements of history like the ones depicted here that get erased from the discourse today. And so I highly encourage everyone on this call to check that out if you haven't seen it yet, and I will drop a link to it right after this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. That was so interesting. And I think I might even have been to that temple that you showed. So that's just wonderful. Thank you to be reminded of that. Our next speaker is Sarah Flounders. Sarah is, as many of you will know, a longtime activist and author based in New York City. She's a contributing editor of the Workers' World newspaper and a leader of the United National Anti-War Coalition, the International Action Center, and the Sanctions Kill campaign. She's the co-author and editor of many books, including most recently, Sanctions, a Wrecking Ball in a Global Economy. Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Radhika, and thank you to the continuing programs that have made such an impact. These webinars are exciting to participate in and to listen to for your other speakers. The best way to oppose the new Cold War with China is to be the most militant opponents of every U.S. war. And U.S. wars are coming thick and fast. If Israel succeeds in crushing Palestinian resistance based on U.S. financial, political, military support, then U.S. imperialism is stronger on a world scale. So Palestine fights for all of us. Their resistance has ignited a global resistance. Before October 7th, Israel, with 75 years of U.S. backing, seemed invincible, all-powerful. Now, the IDF has been frustrated at every turn by the indomitable spirit of Palestinian resistance. They face ambushes without end. Nothing is stable. Nothing is secure. There's a sea change in the U.S., where for the first time, a majority of the population is supportive of Palestine and finds himself in sharp opposition to U.S. policy. There are millions of people in the streets. Let's build on that. There's global outrage at the U.S. role as the enabler of this genocide. On a world scale, people stand with Palestine. Their resistance is our resistance. The liberation of Palestine will be an important step in the liberation of humanity. October 7th opened a new chapter in the worldwide class war. Israel's regime of genocidal crimes against the people of Gaza demands international solidarity. Now, faced with this unwinnable quagmire, the response for the U.S. and Israel is to expand the war. U.S. bombing of Muslim people in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, it goes on and on. This week, 3 days ago, they blew up the two main natural gas pipelines in Iran, leaving millions of Iranians without heat and cooking fuel in winter. This is the way the U.S. and Israel fight their wars, targeting essential infrastructure of civilians. That's the way they always do it. There's this global outrage of what Israel is doing right now in Rafah has ripped the mask off. U.S. and NATO countries have cut off all food, medical care, and schools to all Palestinians, even in Jordan, Lebanon, the West Bank, by cutting off the funding to UNRWA. So when U.S. media and politicians claim they want to protect Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, the sheer hypocrisy is no longer believable. This false charge is a big weapon in war on China, and it's demanding compliance of all U.S. allies against China. Just for example, there are thousands of German Volkswagens, Audis, Porsche cars impounded on ships at U.S. ports because there's a small little Chinese electronic part in these cars. So now Germany must pay U.S. fines, remove the offending part, and agree with U.S. charges on Xinjiang to get their own cars. This is toward U.S. allies. There's bales of clothing made in Vietnam and Malaysia that have to go through isotopic testing. If even a thread of cotton comes from Xinjiang, it's all destroyed by U.S. customs. Supposedly because there's slave labor in Xinjiang, although the cotton industry in Xinjiang is fully mechanized. So we need to militantly oppose the wanton use of economic sanctions on China and on 40 countries, a third of the world population. It's such a powerful weapon of economic destabilization. But sanctions enforcement is now widening U.S. isolation. It's intensifying trade wars with their own imperialist partners, or are they rivals? Much to the frustration of US imperialism, the sanctioned countries are now finding new roads to cooperation and change. That's the game changer. Now, everyone on this panel has been to China and seen the remarkable accomplishments. I wish I could spend my whole talk on this. We all returned full of enthusiasm on what's possible. I've also traveled to Gaza. I've seen the bombed buildings, the open sewers, the lack of even potable waters. Israel has bombed 6 times with full US backing since Hamas won the democratic elections in 2007. And I've seen what calculated destruction by the US has done in Iraq. It's undescribable. I've seen Syria under US bombing, 1/3 of the population displaced refugees, infrastructure targeted, always the schools and hospitals destroyed. And I've seen Xinjiang on a wonderful delegation with Li Suhin. Vibrant, peaceful cities of Kashgar and Urumqi with full markets, lush countryside, prosperous villages. The contrast can't be greater. Now, another point I do want to raise is that stopping a new Cold War with China means opposing US-NATO war in Ukraine. It's 2 years ago this week, February 24th, US-NATO military alliance that then appeared to be the largest military alliance the world had ever seen. 3 million armed forces, the largest array of tanks, of missiles, of aircraft, the most largest combined economic power. There have been 25 years of NATO expansion steadily east to the borders of Russia. NATO seemed unstoppable. Ukraine, with full US backing and a military coup, shelled the Russian population of Ukraine and the Russian border until Russia responded with a military operation. And actually, NATO was thrilled. US strategies considered regime change in Russia an easy move and a key to their next move, on to China. That's exactly how it was seen, a 2-step operation. The most extreme sanctions were quickly rammed through by every member of the G7. This would surely destroy Russia. Regime change seemed inevitable. Biden promised that sanctions against Russia would turn the Russian ruble into rubble. It hasn't succeeded. Instead, the European Union and the NATO alliance is in disarray and economic crisis. And today, literally today, Ukrainian lines are totally collapsing. Advietka, strategically the most important military stronghold, is being abandoned in the most humiliating rout. Thousands of soldiers just leaving and fleeing. So the US is bogged down and exposed, and a majority of the US population is against any funding to the Ukraine. No lessons are learned. They're going straight forward. And they're ominously gearing up for a new confrontation now with China, even though overwhelmingly the population here is increasingly against US wars. But the largest military budget in history just sailed through Congress. Hundreds of line items, hundreds of billions of dollars on countering the China threat. This is an insane, totally reckless economic system. Capitalism, by its very nature, is expand or die, taking us with them. They really are planning World War III. We should take that seriously. The economy here is totally intertwined with military industries. It's the greatest source of profit. It's an endless subsidy to corporate America. So, is China a threat? China is a threat to US domination. Yes, it is. The working class in China is larger than the US and the EU, the G7, and its politically conscious leadership is steering in another direction. That is a threat. China's very existence as a prosperous, developing country confirms that humanity has another choice. The developing world, the global South, looks to China, not to US imperialism. That's a threat. peaceful development and trade rather than economic domination, new infrastructure rather than economic strangulation. China is beautiful beyond imagining for anyone coming to the US. In the US, we survive by being forced to step around homeless, desperate people on a daily basis. We see violence every day and have to keep on going. We see lives cut short. We live in such a violent, edgy, ruthless society that it's a stunning experience to be free of that for even a few days. I was struck by the level of enthusiasm and energy, enthusiasm for solving problems that I saw in China. I didn't meet cynical people. That was quite amazing. And then too soon, we're back here. So what should our response be? I want to say it's that we oppose every US war, oppose the hundreds of billions for endless wars. We don't know what will ignite the new crisis, Taiwan, the South China Sea, Xinjiang. But we have to separate ourselves from the class interests of our class enemy on every front. I say that in ending because we're coming into an election period, and we have to break away from this corrupt two-party imperialist system with one political apparatus determined to maintain corporate power. China is leading a new world order, the construction of a new world order. This is a historic moment. Today, the world system is in a moment of transition. It's qualitatively different. The current economic globalization is not about common development or benefits. It's a law of the jungle where only the strongest survive. So the emergence of another kind of globalization, the GDP of the BRICS is already larger than the US and the G7. It's not only the rise, though, of new powerful economies, China, India, Russia, Brazil, South Africa. It's not only economic growth, but it's new forms of exchange and cooperation in the formerly colonized world. The new globalization put forth by Chinese President Xi Jinping, beginning in 2013 with the Belt and Road Initiative, showed a new direction, a different option. That's what's important. We're living through a fundamental, tumultuous transition from a neo-colonial world system with ruthless winner-take-all, a capitalist world economy, global war mentality, and what's emerging is a different kind of world system focused on trade, development, on a more just and democratic global exchange. Currently, inter-imperialist competition is the norm, but we seek an end to the political division of labor between the imperialist core and the neo-colonial periphery, and that is happening. Suddenly, what's attractive in the global South is a real possibility of a more democratic world system characterized by cooperation, by respect for sovereignty. The goal of the BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, is to develop new, more inclusive forms of globalization. They want cooperation, equal participation. And that's what China's win-win approach provides, a way to peaceful development, an attempt to build partnership based on dialogue rather than confrontation, engage in trade rather than the debt burden of military alliances. So it's a new vision, people-centered development. How's China able to do it? I'll close on this point. US imperialism is incapable of doing it. Nothing confirms more clearly the socialist root of the Chinese economy. State-owned industries are not relentlessly driven to make a profit every quarter. They're free to think and plan and invest long-term. In a capitalist system, you can't do that. If you don't make an immediate profit every quarter, you're simply replaced. Directors, administrators can't survive. Capitalism must expand and make a profit, or it's out of business. So internally, from here in the US and the global West, we also need to build new type of political relations among the people's organizations based on respect, mutual respect, equality, justice, new levels of cooperation, where solidarity and resistance become a material force when they're harnessed. That's the world we seek. So let's organize collectively. Let's collectively demand hands off China and full solidarity with Palestine. This new world is in birth. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was a brilliant analysis, and also, I would say, a very inspiring vision, sort of combining what Gramsci used to call the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. So thank you very much. Exactly what we need. Our next speaker is Danny Haifong. Danny is a socialist activist, YouTuber, writer, and political analyst. He's the author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, A People's History of Fake News from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror. And his articles have appeared in Black Agenda Report, Global Times, CGTN, Counterpunch, and elsewhere. His YouTube channel has over 150,000 subscribers and features high-profile guests on major geopolitical issues. So, Danny, please go ahead.
Thank you, Radhika, and thanks to Friends of Socialist China, as well as the International Manifesto Group, and everyone who participated today. It's great to be with all of you. So first, I just want to outline the context of where the United States and China currently find themselves in terms of relations, very briefly, and then talk about my trip in July of 2023 to China, which was my second time traveling to the mainland. So to begin, right now, how I see it in terms of U.S.-China relations is I've been calling it a kind of faux rapprochement or fake diplomacy period, where the United States, because of numerous quagmires that it finds itself that were outlined in prior talks by Sarah Flounders and others, for example, Ukraine, where the United States and NATO find themselves in a war of attrition that they cannot win, or in the onslaught and genocide in Gaza, where the United States finds themselves completely paralyzed and totally motivated to enable what is one of the biggest human catastrophes in recent human history, and which could very well leak into, and already really is, turning into a regional and, of course, global war. And all of these conflicts, whether we're talking about Gaza, whether we're talking about Ukraine, or whether we're talking about the Asia Pacific and the US new Cold War on China, all of them have the potential to become major global conflicts of a scale that we have not witnessed prior. So the United States, because it is in a very delicate position, a very fragile position, it's in a period of decline. It is an empire that is not rising anymore. It is falling. And this is seen in the economic realm, where its capitalist system is overrun by a myriad of contradictions and has actually turned its economy primarily into a weapon of war, which cannot be sustained given the correlation of forces around the world. Then, of course, you have the military quagmires and the political crises, a crisis of legitimacy at home, where both political parties are increasingly finding themselves more and more unpopular with the general population, and of course, the military wars around the world, which have become a stain on the image of American exceptionalism, showing just how criminal the empire really is. So there's myriad of crises going on, and the United States has had to back off over the last 6 to 12 months. The United States has attempted to play the role of a kind of diplomatic aggressor, where you've had numerous visits from political officials. When I was in China, Janet Yellen actually was making, I believe it was her first or second time to China over the last couple of years. And at the same time, the United States had issued a travel warning to all Americans, saying that because China is supposedly wantonly and arbitrarily arresting people, that China is a dangerous place to travel. This has been the game of the Biden administration, to increase and escalate all the war maneuvers that the prior administrations from Obama to Trump had established, whether it's sanctions or military encirclement, while now needing to play a role of kind of a diplomatic aggressor because of the United States' fragile position in the world. And this confusion is reflected, and this contradiction is reflected in the general situation in the United States. A recent poll came out showing that about 75% of US adults really see China and Taiwan, for example, this conflict that the United States is instigating between China and its province of Taiwan, as important to US national interests. And you would think, okay, well, many Americans see, for example, Gaza is very important to the United States, to themselves, because there's a direct connection. However, I would caution to say that this number probably more so reflects prior polls that show that there's a huge decline in public opinion toward China in the United States and the collective West, and that this reflects that there is a significant population that does view this conflict that the United States is instigating as existential, meaning meaningful to them, and not in the ways that we would like them to view it. We want people to view this conflict as meaningful. We don't want them to view this as somehow connected to their own vested interests. On the contrary, the vast majority of people in the United States and the collective West have nothing to gain but utter and total destruction from a war with China. But this is the point of people-to-people exchanges, is that there needs to be a front, people willing to travel to places like China, Russia, all the so-called adversaries of the United States, and tell the truth about them and to build real relationships. And so that's how I see people-to-people exchanges. I see them as important for not just countering the US-led war drive with China, but also in building and developing a better world, one that is characterized by multipolarity, sovereignty, and mutual cooperation, rather than the unipolar domination and empire that the United States forwards as a dying hegemon. When I was in China in July 2023, I participated in the third dialogue on exchanges and mutual learning among civilizations, which was kind of a breakthrough conference to discuss the new global civilization initiative outlined by Xi Jinping earlier that year. And it really is a roadmap for how to not just develop, because there's a global development initiative, a global security initiative, but the global civilization initiative is all about how to bridge differences among cultures, how to respect differences among people, how to understand the different national and cultural realities of people around the world, while also developing a common bond toward a better life, a better world, and a more peaceful and democratic world. And so I participated in that conference, and it was quite clear that the global South is really where China finds not just its friends, but also its focus. It's focused in terms of what is the future of the world order? Is it a dying Western empire that's led by the United States, which it has at its core a peak interest in containing China's rise? No, China will forever, as long as the Communist Party of China is in leadership, will forever view the United States and Europe as potential partners and as countries they do not want antagonism with. But the focus where there's real solidarity, where there's real friendship being built, is in the global South. And that's why the vast majority of the over 100 plus, I believe it was hundreds, that participated in this conference were from Africa. They're from South America. They were from Asia. The vast majority were from the global South. And during this trip, I was able to make my second trip to Gansu province and see, even in just this short period, how so much progress has been made in what was once one of the poorest provinces in China, and still remains one of the poorest provinces in China in terms of relative development. I was there in 2019 in the city of Dunhuang, and in that city, there already has been so much development around its history with the Silk Road, bridging culture, bridging the diverse and multi-ethnic community that exists in this province in order to develop the economy here and ensure that people have a better standard of living. I was able to go to the new theater. It was a huge national theater built there in order to watch what was a beautiful performance on the Silk Road by dancers and singers who were disabled physically by blindness and by hearing impairment. And that was just an incredible performance. And it showed that in just a few years, from 2019 to 2023, there had been a rapid infrastructure development. The city center in Dunhuang was just incredible to see how everything was new. That's what China is focused on at the moment. It is focused on its internal development, and it's also focused on how to build a democratic and more prosperous world order that is mutual, that is defined by multipolarity. So it's internal development, its attention to the poorest, to the most underdeveloped within China is not exported, but is reflected in a foreign policy as well that is all about establishing peaceful relations and peaceful development. And so that's what you get when you go to China. You get a scenario, you get a situation where, as Sarah Flanders said, you don't meet cynical people. You meet people who are confident, who want to talk not about war. I had very few conversations about China's rise as a new global power or superpower. Most Chinese, and including the leadership, don't think about politics in this way. But there was quite a lot of curiosity about why the United States is on this war rampage with China, why it seeks a counterproductive policy of aggression toward China. So there's a lot of curiosity, but there's also a lot of desire for deeper friendship. So people-to-people exchanges are incredibly important. It's incredibly important to see the progress that has been made in countries like China. It's incredibly important to make real connections with people, as well as establish channels within China in order to show and demonstrate what it really truly means to be an ambassador for peace, to be an activist for peace, to be someone, whether you're an organization or an individual, who truly wants to see a better world. It is not just about opposing war. That is incredibly important, opposing empire, but it's also about building a foundation for how we can participate in this emerging multipolar world, how we can ensure that this dying empire doesn't just go out with a destructive bang, but that what comes after it truly does have the assistance and solidarity of those people who have, unfortunately, like those in the collective West and the United States, have been dragged into a war after war after war in their name. So it was an incredible trip, and I cannot wait to go back to China several more times in my lifetime in order to continue this work. And I do encourage everyone who is listening and watching to consider participating in people-to-people exchanges as well, because they're incredibly important. So thank you, everyone, for listening and for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Danny. That was a really important reminder and emphasis on why people-to-people contacts matter. So thanks very much. Really informative. Our next speaker will be Dee Knight. Dee is a veteran of the U.S. peace and socialist movements, and he's a member of the International Committee of the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, and also a member of the Friends of Socialist China Advisory Group. His most recent book, which, by the way, is very contemporary and very racy, is called A Realistic Path to Peace: How to Stop the New Cold War and Prevent Nuclear Disaster. So, Dee, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm stunned to hear Radhika Desai call my book racy. Thank you. If we want to make peace, more of us should visit China. I visited China last November as part of a China is Not Our Enemy delegation, originally sponsored by Code Pink, the well-known feminist peace group. Immediately after Code Pink announced the tour, it was vilified in an attack article in the New York Times. Thankfully, we found Li Xiuhin and his China-U.S. Solidarity Network, who became our highly professional tour guide. I'm also grateful to the Chow Collective and to Sarah Flanders, both of whom were significant, along with Radhika, in the development of my book, as well as what I have to say today. Our visit started in Taiwan, so we could see clearly that Taiwan is very much part of China. Both Chinese governments and the US agree, officially sharing this view since at least 1979, when US President Nixon and Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping signed a treaty to that effect. So why is the US pushing for Taiwan to be independent of the mainland, spending billions to arm it to the teeth and sending warships through the Taiwan Strait, thus violating China's territorial waters at the risk of triggering a flare-up to war at any moment? Why is it forging an East Asian NATO against China? And why are Green Berets now deployed just 6 miles off China's coast, as reported recently by both Newsweek and Danny Haiphong? 6 miles off the coast of Xiamen. We met a Taiwanese couple who told us Nancy Pelosi's 2022 visit to Taiwan resulted in the transfer of a major part of Taiwan's very large semiconductor manufacturing business to Arizona. They said many Taiwanese consider this transfer to be a virtual theft of one of Taiwan's most important economic resources. It threatens Taiwan's huge business in chip sales to mainland China, Taiwan's largest trading partner. That highlights one of the reasons for the US hybrid war against China. The US only wants peace if it can continue to be the dominant economic partner. Touring in mainland China provides an education in itself. On the main streets of Shanghai and Beijing, traffic whispers along. About half the cars are electric, and nearly all the scooters and bikes are. Underground in both cities, the subways hum along. They're more extensive than New York's MTA and humble it for cleanliness and safety. All the stations I saw have escalators, elevators, and super clean floors. 31 Chinese cities have new subway systems, more than the US and Europe combined. We rode a bullet train from Shanghai to Beijing. These bullet trains now connect all of China's major cities, following the gigantic infrastructure projects of recent decades. The US has no bullet trains and cannot seem to find financing for them, especially since the profit potential in military production is so much higher. Some argue that China's fabulous development is based on super low wages and bad working conditions, but workers' wages have doubled and doubled again and again in recent decades. Last year, China celebrated elevating 800 million people out of extreme poverty, recognized as a world historic achievement. And social wages are much higher than in the US. Free education through university, socialized health care, and very low-cost housing for all workers. We visited Shanghai's famous Jewish Refugees Museum, which relates the stories of more than 200,000 Jewish refugees who found safety there after escaping Nazi terror in the 1930s. This pro-Semitic Chinese legacy provided contrast for me to recent US media reports of China's response to Israel's current bombing of Gaza. They called China's leaders anti-Semitic for refusing to justify Israel's genocidal Gaza bombardment. The issue of genocide was my main reason to visit China. I wanted to see for myself, to deal with the scandal stories in US media about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. They echo US government claims of genocide in China. The claims are unfounded, based on flimsy evidence that has been repeatedly debunked. In researching this issue for my book, A Realistic Path to Peace, I found that when Noam Chomsky was asked in a New York Times interview if the situation of the Uyghurs was worse than for the people of Gaza, he said no. The Uyghurs were not having their power plants destroyed, their sewage plants destroyed, and were not subjected to regular bombing. Recent US denials of genocide in Palestine, with US support, absolve the Israeli leaders who have called Palestinians human animals and want to drive them out of their historic land. Meanwhile, the same officials and media scream of genocide and slave labor in Xinjiang, but provide no evidence. We were lucky to visit Xinjiang while the cotton harvest was in full swing. we found nothing to support US and European claims of slave labor, which have led to a widespread boycott of Chinese cotton products. Instead of forced labor, we watched a big mechanical harvester moving through a multi-acre cotton field, chewing up the cotton and spitting out 3-ton bales. We arrived just before lunchtime and noticed the harvester had completed half the field, producing 20 bales for 60 tons. It was expected to complete that field by the end of the day for a total of 40 bales and 120 tons. We also saw some gangs of hand laborers cleaning out the cotton on the edges of these fields, working in groups of 10 or 12, with their scooters parked along the sides of the fields. We determined that these people are day laborers contracted through a local temporary labor cooperative. They're paid on a piecework basis by the bags of cotton they pick, earning between $20 and $40 US for a day's work. Not much, of course, but it's definitely not slavery, and it merely cleans up the parts of the cotton fields the big harvester machines can't reach. We could see the cotton bales and hand-picked stacks of raw cotton outside the processing plants not far from the fields. The bales were vastly more of the stock than the hand-picked stacks. Western accusations of slave labor have caused a scandal designed to isolate China and strangle its economy. Some US fashion companies have investigated for themselves to prove they are not participating in or benefiting from a slave trade. The slavery slander is really a projection of the West's own centuries of reliance on slavery to enrich itself and generate the Industrial Revolution. Now they pretend to be concerned about human rights in China, but their real problem is that China has been successful and is now able to prosper from its own agriculture and industry. We also visited the beautiful Idka Mosque, one of the biggest in China, in ancient Kashgar. There is a plaque there near the mosque's entrance in Arabic, Chinese, and English, saying it was designated in 2001 as a key relics preservation site by China's National State Council. Ample state funding has been allocated since then for major maintenance projects. The plaque says, "This demonstrates that our country implements the policy of freedom of religion." People come and go in the mosque. 5 times a day, it fills with thousands of worshipers for prayers. The Uyghurs are Sufi Muslims, less strict than their Sunni cousins in most of Central and Western Asia. Kashgar, as the center of Uyghur culture, is famous as the home of songs and dances. We watched dance performances in both Kashgar and Urumqi, Xinjiang's capital. When dancing, the Uyghur women wore bright-colored dresses, headscarves and earrings, bracelets and necklaces. This merrier expression clashes with the strict discipline of the jihadi Wahhabi sect that formed the East Turkestan Islamic movement that waged a violent campaign to convert the Uyghurs and use them for their separatist plans, which was funded by the US after it removed the ETIM from its list of terrorist groups. Both Urumqi and Kashgar teem with tourism, but we were the only gringos present, as a Chinese police officer advised our guide. That's a tragedy. More Westerners need to come and see for themselves. That may be the best way to disprove the official US government and media slanders and help build people-to-people friendship. We found nothing but friendliness everywhere we visited. The Chinese people are definitely not our enemy, and their government is doing a very good job serving and protecting them. It really is time for the US to try harder to make friends with China and help forge common prosperity and a shared future. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dee. That was really very interesting and revealing. I had not known that the Islam of Xinjiang is Sufism, which is really quite interesting. Thank you so much. Okay, our next speaker and is the penultimate speaker or item on our agenda is Bahman Azad. And before I go to Bahman, let me just say that after Bahman, we'll be showing you a pre-recorded video, and then we will have some time for questions and answers. So I see there's quite a lively debate going on in the chat. So I hope many of you will raise these points and questions later. So to Bahman. Baman Azad is an Iranian-American peace activist who has been involved in the struggle for peace and justice in the United States and around the world since the 1970s. He's a retired professor of sociology and economics and has a doctoral degree in sociology and a master's in economics. He's a representative of the World's Peace Council at the United Nations and a member of the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC, which of course Sarah also is associated with very closely and is one of the leading members of. Baman is the author of the book Heroic Struggle, Bitter Defeat, Factors Contributing to the Dismantling of the Socialist State in the USSR, published by international publishers. So Baman, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Radhika. Thanks to International Manifesto Group and the Friends of Socialist China. I'm very honored to be among these group of speakers, and it is important to hear all of the viewpoints. It was very educational for me. I do not want to get into the politics of this issue, as most of the speakers spoke about it. I particularly identify with the presentation of my dear comrade Sarah Flanders, who put the whole thing in a proper perspective, so I don't need to repeat that. So what I will do is just go over the report of our trip to China and talk about what we observed. This trip was a part of an official delegation invited by Chinese People's Association for Peace and Disarmament, which is for us, for those who are familiar, equivalent of ECAP in Cuba and Simon Bolivar Institute in Venezuela. They are related to the International Department of the Communist Party and also part of the International Foreign Ministry of China. This was a formal invitation, a bilateral meeting between the two organizations. The talk of this visit was going on for a long time between us, but due to restrictions, the COVID restrictions that China had for a long time over the trip to China was delayed, and until it was possible as soon as the gates were open. And we traveled to China in November of 2023. It was a short trip, too short for us, but we learned a lot from it. We visited, first we arrived in Beijing, and we were there for 2 days, and most of our formal discussions were held in Beijing. And then traveled to Shanghai on a bullet train, as Prince mentioned, which was by itself fascinating. To visit the development plans in China and the projects that they are implementing for a future model of urbanization and development, which was in itself fascinating. A lot of our friends spoke about it here, so I will not repeat that. But the main thing that we discussed was, first, we had a kind of a Zoom meeting, joint Zoom meeting from Beijing with some scholars, Chinese scholars in Washington, D.C. That was the first meeting we had, which was about U.S. politics and U.S.-China relations, which was very in-depth analysis of what stands in the future with regard to everything that is going on between China and the United States. Of course, all the speeches were very optimistic that with the policy that China is, following and advancing, ultimately the victory will come with the successful development towards a better new world order. The second part of our discussions, which were actually the most formal part, was the bilateral meeting that we had with the CPAPD leadership. And this was about actually the content of President Xi Jinping's theory of socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era. Of course, this was the general topic of the discussion, but we went through all the aspects of Xi Jinping's thoughts, and they explained to us about different aspects. And actually, they gave us a present, a 5-volume book of Xi Jinping's thoughts that we brought with us, which I haven't gotten to read it yet, but we will. We will take time to read all of it, but it's fascinating to have that. But the discussion was a kind of exchange. Of course, comrades from China presented the various aspects of, for example, China's global initiative, security initiative, China's diplomatic approach, China's approach to peace, China's relations with the United States, and all those aspects, each one under different topic, subtopic, and we discussed that and we exchanged. Of course, their presentations was followed by feedback and questions from our side about the issues that were raised. It was very illuminating and informative, and we really got a full grasp of what Chinese approach is to the whole world situation. And it was very educational for us, and it really helped us understand what we need to do here in the United States, in fact. Following that, we of course had some visits to the museum that the comrades mentioned about the history of Chinese Communist Party. We had various visitations of different places. In Shanghai, it was mostly about China's development. One of our speakers spoke about the China's Urban Development Center. We spent a lot of time there, and we were informed about various aspects of what it means to have a socialist city. One thing that was very critical, they told us that the way things are designed in these new cities, all the social services for the citizens are within a 10 to 15 minutes walk of wherever you are in the city, which to me and to us was very fascinating, unbelievable that you can design a city of 1 million people with those characteristics. But they are thinking that far in advance about what they are trying to build, and we saw examples of it, and we were humbled by everything that the Chinese are doing. The main thing was our meeting after us towards the end of the trip. That was based on how we can cooperate between the two organizations, and we, of course, both sides recognize the necessity of the Chinese peace organization, work closely with the US peace organizations to implement a peaceful policy for both sides and advance the cause of peace between the United States and China. And for that purpose, we agreed on certain principles and agreements. One, that both organizations agreed to inform the other partner of the latest developments in each country, our analysis of how we see things in our country, and relay that information to the other side. They would do also the same thing for us to keep us updated about the advancements in China and the new developments, and for us to relay this to the public in our own countries. So that is one aspect of it. We both agreed that people-to-people exchanges are critical in this area, and we agreed to organize from both sides delegations, not only delegations of organizations between ourselves, but delegations, public delegations, inviting people, the youth, labor, other professional people to send delegations and have the exchanges of delegations between us, so that people become familiar with the realities of China. And one thing that we promised them, they didn't need this kind of promise from, we didn't need that kind of promise from us, was to debunk all of the lies about China in the United States and help overcome that Cold War mentality that the power establishment in the United States is pushing. So with those commitments, we came back, and we are determined to follow up on all of the agreements that we have made with Chinese organization, our sister organization. I should mention that the Chinese are very much interested in dealing with the peace movement, and they showed much of interest in getting involved in the peace movement. And one aspect of it is that prior to our trip, they had invited a 22 delegation of the leadership of the World Peace Council to China. And after us, they had invited, and it was happening, a delegation of the Vietnam Peace Committee to China. I think the two sides, the Vietnam and the United States, are critical to the Chinese strategy moving forward, and I think they are very, very clear and conscious about the plan and the details of it and steps that are needed to be taken. So we are honored to be a partner with them right now, and we are doing our best to pursue the agreements that we made with Chinese Association for Peace and Disarmament. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bahman. That was really great, giving us a very live understanding of how these people-to-people contacts are made between organizations, and perhaps you are inspiring some others to undertake similar projects. So thanks very much. Now we will have a brief pre-recorded message from the Communist Party of the United States of America. So yeah, Carlos, please show it.
Comrades and friends, the Communist Party USA extends its warm greetings and sincere appreciation to Friends of Socialist China and the International Manifesto Group for organizing this crucial webinar on opposing the US-led Cold War 2.0. Peace and multilateralism are the major issues of our era. The conflict between, on the one hand, a dwindling and weakening US global hegemony, and on the other hand, a burgeoning movement for sovereignty and multilateralism around the world, has become the primary contradiction in the international scene. In 2022, the United States Congress passed the America Competes Act, which, among other things, allocates $500 million for negative news media coverage of China. This legislation is part of the continuation of the anti-communist policies of the Cold War, updated for the post-Soviet reality, a war that we've termed Cold War 2.0. This legislation is explicitly intended to fund negative coverage of China's Belt and Road Initiative specifically. Western media claims that the Belt and Road infrastructure projects are part of debt trap diplomacy or are imperialistic in some other way. Meanwhile, the US-backed International Monetary Fund imposes devastating austerity and privatization measures on developing countries that default on their usurious loans. The imperialists of the world are projecting their own crimes onto the actions of China as part of their anti-communist campaign. Western media spreads claims of forced labor and repression against Uyghurs in Xinjiang province, despite the fact that delegations from many countries and organizations, including the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, have visited Xinjiang and concluded that there was no such forced labor or forced cultural assimilation. Meanwhile, United States prisons openly use forced prison labor, and the US has the highest prison population in the world. In fact, the Uyghur population of Xinjiang is flourishing. Every year, there are more mosques and centers of Uyghur culture being built, and the Uyghur language is taught in public schools. The United States has been pursuing a policy of encirclement and containment against China and runs more than 800 military bases in 80 countries. The rhetoric of the US government, the United States ruling capitalist class, and all of their institutions make it perfectly clear that they are busy manufacturing consent for their Cold War 2.0, which is focused on trying to repress the peaceful rise of China. Today, the American people are suffering from inflation, housing shortages, racist police violence, eroding civil and reproductive rights, student and medical debt, environmental crises, etc. The last thing they want or need is further international conflict, on top of the ongoing proxy wars in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It should not need to be said that the Chinese people do not want war either. We Marxists know that the working classes of all countries are intrinsically progressive and anti-war. After all, it is our lives that are sacrificed by the capitalists for the interests of the capitalists. And even during times of relative peace, it is our tax dollars that are used to pay for the bloated military-industrial complex, while public services such as healthcare and education are subjected to devastating cuts. The capitalists are well aware of this and know that they must make a constant effort to manufacture consent, or, to borrow a phrase from former CPUSA National Committee member Michael Parenti, they are inventing a reality to justify their wars. So how can we counter this endless confrontational propaganda? Today, there is a trend of increased conflict and destabilization across the world, spearheaded by imperialism and neocolonialism. Countering this, there's been a resurgence in the US peace movement not seen since the start of the Iraq War back in 2003. At the same time, there's been a resurgence in the US labor movement, with labor union public approval ratings at a high not seen since the 1960s. The racist police murder of George Floyd in 2020 led to tens of millions of people hitting the streets in protest against police brutality. The June 2022 overturn of Roe v. Wade induced a surge of activism and voter organization. We've also seen the growth of progressive organizations across the United States and across the world. The Communist Party USA is growing quickly, with thousands of new members joining the party. Other organizations, like those of our friends here, the DSA, Friends of Socialist China, the US Peace Council, the United Anti-War Coalition, the International Manifesto Group, among many others, have seen growth in membership and activity. There's also been a resurgence of progressive media across the internet, with people like Denny Haifong and others creating alternative avenues to inform the masses, who, until recently, had only corporate media available to them to learn about the world. All of these organizations and people are doing fantastic work, and it is an honor to be here with them today. As Marxist-Leninists, we know that all of these crises are symptoms of the crisis in capitalism. Our party calls this the Communist Plus. It is our perspective, informed by Marxist theory and practice, that we bring to these mass movements. If the peace movement is going to be successful, it must build a strong alliance with these movements, and especially the labor movement. While corporate media and bourgeois politicians accuse protesters and progressive activists of being un-American and in league with foreign governments, we all know that the reality is that the working class is simply waking up and fulfilling its progressive role. Part of that progressive role is international solidarity between all workers, and we're very optimistic about this resurgence. We must continue to facilitate people-to-people exchanges between China and citizens of bourgeois states. When people from different countries develop strong ties, it becomes harder for reactionaries to spread false information vilifying people from other countries. This task is much easier than people might assume. In fact, there are currently about 72,000 US citizens living in China today. China issues many visas for tourism, study, work, and more. And recently, China has entered into new visa-free agreements with many countries. To build people-to-people relations, Westerners must be able to see the real China, and not the false image of China portrayed by a Western capitalist media. We hope that the organizations represented at this webinar can continue their good work, fighting for peace and friendship between our countries and China. We hope that their members, as well as all of the working class, will have the opportunity to visit China, so that they can share their experiences with their fellow countrymen when they return home. Our efforts in this area have been very good so far, but there are places where we can expand the scope of our work. Western Communist and Workers' parties, for example, should continue to foster fraternal relations between each other and with the Communist Party of China. Lastly, building a connection between the youth in China and the youth in our countries is another important step to ensure that the strong people-to-people ties we are building continue long into the future. Many of the organizations represented here today have vibrant youth wings, including our own Young Communist League. To many people, it may feel at times as though the decisions of war and peace, competition and cooperation, insanity and sanity are decisions made out of sight in shadowy halls. The truth, however, is that there is no force more powerful than the people's will when organized. By building people-to-people relations, by doing what we can to make the world smaller, by talking to each other, and by organizing together, we're building the bedrock of peace and the foundations of a better world. On behalf of the Communist Party USA, thank you.
Well, everyone, that was a really fascinating and I think very lucid presentation by the Communist Party of the USA. So thank you to them. And now we have some time for questions and answers. So I think it would be best if you have a question and wish to raise it, can you please use the raise hand function, which should be under the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. So, and while we are waiting for questions, I should also say that if you really like this presentation and you want to share it with others, it's the live stream will remain on we've been live streaming it and it will remain on the Friends of Socialist China YouTube channel. So it'll be very easy to find it. Carlos, I think, wants to say something. So please go ahead, Carlos.
Thanks very much, Radhika. And thank you very much to all the speakers. I think really fascinating presentations. And I just had one question, which to the speakers or whoever feels like they might be interested in answering, which was, does it feel like the narrative is shifting a little bit in relation to China? And does it feel like, especially within leftist or anti-war or progressive circles, there's more opportunity to engage with people on the issue of China and to present the idea of China as our ally in the struggle for a better world? Because it seems to me that the contrast between China and the West, and particularly the US and Britain, where I live, on all the key issues that people like us care about, is just becoming starker and starker. You know, for example, in relation to climate change, while you've got the Biden administration issuing new drilling licenses while it's going out of fashion, and expanding its use of hydraulic fracturing, and pushing this insane war in Ukraine, which is obviously having a massive environmental impact. China, meanwhile, has emerged as, the kind of undisputed renewable energy superpower, and last year was responsible for 55% of all renewable energy investment globally. Then in relation to poverty, I think we can all recognize, just, going for a walk down the street, we can all recognize that poverty is getting worse. People's living conditions are getting worse. We're facing cost of living crisis. It's February, it's the winter in London, and you've got literally millions of people in this country that are having to make that very tough choice between heating and eating. Meanwhile, China's made this historically unprecedented progress in relation to tackling poverty, and it's very clear that the lives of people in China continue to get better. On international issues, on the question of this awful genocide that's taking place in Gaza, China's pushing very consistently, very vociferously for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire and a path to peace, a peace conference to bring about a lasting, sustainable, and just peace based on recognizing the national rights of the Palestinian people. In relation to Ukraine, again, China's pushing for a peace and has been doing for over 2 years, whereas the US has been adding fuel to the fire and insistent on fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. On militarism generally, the US and its allies are involved in a forever war, a permanent war against the global South, against socialism, against multipolarity, whilst China's record is incredibly peaceful. China literally hasn't been at war. The Chinese armed forces haven't dropped a bomb for over 40 years. So, is it easier, given these contrasts, to engage with ordinary people and particularly progressive people around the question of China as a force for peace, as a force for progress? Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. I'll take one more question from Yuri. I'll insert a very quick one of my own and then go to Danny, and any of the other speakers who would like to respond. So, Yuri, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. Excuse me. I have here are my questions. I have a question for the Chinese panelists and those from the Chinese diaspora, which is regarding the thorny topic of Taiwan. Isn't the best way forward on the Taiwan question, which is being weaponized by the pivot to Asia crowd, and it's probably the one topic that's going to divide bitterly the left on China, is that China and Taiwan agreed to a referendum and asked the people of Taiwan to vote if they want to be reunited with mainland China or to be an independent country. And if the results is Taiwan wanting to be independent, then the non-aggression pact and all Western foreign bases and weaponry is removed from Taiwan, and Taiwan remains formally a neutral country. And to the Americans on the panel, this is off topic, but I would love to ask this one, is what's it going to take for the broad people power movements from from racial justice groups to social justice groups and anti-imperialists to show more urgent solidarity to the plight of Native Americans and Indigenous Hawaiians and Alaskans? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yuri. And my very quick question is, if any of the panelists would please comment on exactly how war and China and such issues are going to, how they see them playing out already in the election campaign, and how they expect this situation will evolve in the rest of the year. That would be very interesting for us as well. So I will now go to the speakers, beginning with Dee. and then Danny and Bahram, and then Lee Soo-hin, and then Bahram, and then Sarah. So Dee, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Radhika, and thank you for the questions. I think that the fundamental recognizing China's progressive role is the surge in solidarity with the Palestine liberation struggle. We have not seen such a surge in my lifetime, and I'm not that young. And in all the discussions about the United States backing of Israeli genocide in Palestine, people know that China is standing up for peace. It has intervened numerous times in the United Nations, not only calling for a ceasefire, pushing hard for humanitarian aid, and calling for an emergency world conference for peace in Palestine and West Asia. And people can see very clearly the difference between this and what the United States President and State Department and Secretary of Defense are doing. They talk about urging Israel to soften up while they deliver more bombs. I mean, the people I work with in the Bronx Anti-War Coalition talk about this a lot and recognize the role of China is different. Just one point in Radhika's question regarding the elections. I've addressed this also in my book, Realistic Path to Peace, that we are challenged really to find new paths, new ways of political expression. It's crystal clear that both political parties are essentially one. And while, we're confronted with a choice between genocide and fascism, what a great choice. Obviously, this is an opportunity for the progressive movement and the left to forge new methods and means of political expression that are outside of the official Republican electoral system. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dee. We'll now go next to Danny.
Sure. So in terms of Carlos's question about whether China will be increasingly viewed as a friend of the world, as a friend of progress, I mean, I would say in general, yes, because the objective situation will ostensibly speak for itself and I believe, will continue to overwhelm the ideological war as well as the other aspects of war being leveled against China. And so we do have that to look forward to. And I think that's already been the case, especially amongst those who are following these conflicts, who are actually tuned in to what the United States is doing around the world, what the West overall, its overall position, and the contradictions that Carlos spoke of. I think all of that does lend itself to a more favorable situation for changing people's opinions on China, especially in the collective West. There is a dynamic, though, given that I am mainly in the media at this point, especially independent media, there's a dynamic that we will have to confront, and I think it's one of the most important ones to confront, is the contradiction we're seeing in, and I'm going to just, I guess, control for the fact that there's widespread solidarity for Palestine. I think that's important to note. But among those who are paying attention to what we could call the great power conflict, the so-called great power competition that the United States especially is angling toward, for those who are following developments in Ukraine, who are interested in opposing what is a suicidal path to war with Russia, we have seen, I think, especially in independent media, a big contradiction, a huge contradiction in terms of the equal or lack thereof, equal coverage of this path to war toward China. So I think that is one of the biggest obstacles we face, in that we have a huge opportunity. For example, Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson was just massively watched. Hundreds of millions of people watched it. Most of those people reside in the collective West, which is a hugely positive development because people are interested in Putin. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of people who like Tucker Carlson, which, you know, has a lot of problems. But nonetheless, there is a lot more willingness to listen to the Russian side and less so on the Chinese side. I think that's a reflection of a troubling historical reality, a troubling reality that exists in the collective West, where the xenophobia, where the yellow peril, you know, worldview, the racism toward China is just that much more stark. So that's something we're going to have to address. And it's just something I want to note, given that there is, of course, a lot of war fatigue. There's more opposition to NATO's war in Ukraine than ever before. There is this wall-to-wall solidarity, I would say, amongst anyone who's interested in the future of humanity and opposing Israel and the United States' onslaught on Gaza. But the great power competition questions, but when it comes to those who are focusing on NATO and Russia versus, let's say, the US and the collective West and China, we do see a discrepancy in worldview, where China is more likely to be viewed as the boogeyman, as Putin called it at Tucker Carlson's interview, where it's easier to project and repeat the lies about China that have been so propagated. So I just want to note that.
Great, thank you, Danny. I don't see Lee Siew-hin anymore, so if he appears, we will of course go to him. But
I'm here.
Here, please go ahead. Yes.
Yes.
Please. Yeah.
I always think, because I'm living and work between China and US, I also speak Mandarin and Cantonese, and so I see getting a very different perspective. I always encourage people to move away from the Eurocentric idea of the activism or maybe the mindset, because what defined in the US or Western world about not only imperialisms or Cold War or racisms and neoliberal ideology affecting other countries, include our country. I know many right wings are subscribed totally to the neoliberalism idea. But on the same time, activism also should not be Eurocentric design, because many things at work is a have a different idea and different experience on how the social movement has been structured, how the revolution has been structured. One of the things is I've been talking about Palestinian issue multiple times, and that I've been many activists, especially from Middle East and Asia, has been pointing out that the anti-Semitic ideology, because anti-Semitic by itself is very Eurocentric, because it's the anti-Semitism primarily happened in Europe and US, and rest of the world is never been an issue. So when you within the same movement, same thing like when we're talking about China, that means that we have a different Chinese philosophy or maybe experience how to run the activism, or maybe how to analyze the world as a whole. In China, I know many great community activists or bloggers or writers, the TikTok speakers and influencers. They produce very excellent analysis on how the revolution should be happened, how the analysis on the current situation in Palestine. By the way, overwhelming majority of the Chinese public support the Palestinian struggles. So also the great analysis on how U.S. imperialisms operate and how we should able to defeat the U.S. imperialism. But the only catch is 99% of them, they only speak Chinese, they don't speak English. the TikTok videos, of course, in Chinese, but because the U.S. Attack the TikTok Global, which is the people now seeing in the U.S., are nothing related with the TikTok China. So TikTok China, the video produced in TikTok China sites, you cannot see that on TikTok Global. So that's a problem. The same thing. Many I think that one of the things that activism works sometimes, and then I need to think outside the box to get rid of the Eurocentric idea. Listen to the different activists, not only near the U.S. or maybe, but also from the Middle East, from Russia, from China. The local people, how local genuine activists, how it speaks. For example, there's one of the my favorite TikTok China speaker. He has a 35 million fans, followers, and then his word is we can influence the progressive circle in China. His name is Sima Nan. I always like his video. His video should be translated to US and then people can watch, and then he's making a very good point. Similar like that kind of things. We should have a mechanism that how we can translate the document, the video, and then the news simultaneous from English to Chinese or to Russian or Arabic on the same tokens. And then Chinese, Arabics, and the Russians materials can translate massively, can translate to Western words, and then that can understand our point of view. Probably when you see, wow, there's a different, wow, there's maybe I never thought about it. That's how we build the communication, because when we set down a mindset that how we're going to operate certain things, how we're going to do the activism, not necessary. We share the same value with Western activists that will building mistrust in the first place. We should have some way we can communicate better and exchange idea from the beginning. I mean, translation is one of the very important things we should also think about.
That's great. We are about 10 minutes before we come to our 2-hour mark. So what I'll do is I see one of the non-speakers who probably has a question. So I will get them in first, Mohsen Rezvani. And then I'll go to Bahram, Sarah, and any of the other speakers who still want to respond to either the new question or the old ones. So Mohsen Razavi, please go ahead. Rezvani, please go ahead.
Hello, Mohsen Rezvani, that's right. Thank you very much. The report was very interesting and learning. I have a question related to peace movement, people to people, which was emphasized by Danny and other speakers. I think through my experience, the mass movement for the peace, which the Communist Party of US represented in the showing in Turkey, in US, how the people are in the street and emphasizing the strength of the mass movement for peace. Did you, in China, in your visit, meet any mass movement for peace, or it was only official relationship and invitation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, okay, I will go to Bahram and then Sarah. And actually, Bahram, if you would just wait, I have one more quick question from Linda, and then I will go. So, Linda, that will be the last question, but please go ahead.
I just have a very quick question for Lee Siu-hin. You had said that 99% of the population of China doesn't speak English. Is there any interest in a kind of, would there be any interest, do you think, in a kind of volunteer English Mandarin language exchange? Would that be of any interest? Would that be something we could organize at some point in time?
Yes, thank you. That always an interest. I think unfortunately, the right wings, that one of the way the coalitions had happening in China, or maybe also in Russia, and also certainly in other Middle Eastern countries, was organizing English study circles. When I said that's a left wing did a very poor job on this. That when Gation come or whatever, they don't speak English, it's local language. That's always has been the problem. I think that's it's a not simple thing. It's a more difficult thing, believe me, because I've been doing this for so many years, and I've just become sometimes amazed that I'm the only designated translator, interpreters for whole meetings or whole big things. When I said 99% doesn't speak English, maybe I'm misleading, but more likely right wing will be more. That's many people in China speak English, especially my hometown, Hong Kong. But the more likely that will be right wing, because their dreamland is United States and Western countries. So more likely, if you're coming to like a China or some certain countries, that people can speak English are more likely to be right wing. That's a reality. Left wing doesn't mean they don't speak English. They don't learn English, but they don't see the needed to use them daily life or business or work. So that's a challenge. So to make your answer is number one, it's great. But right wing has been a part of the revolution, and CIA and NED have been doing this for the last 30, 40 years, very successful. We need to learn why they can do it. We need to put more effort. And number two is still the very simple translation is very important, because like a TikTok video who can translate, or maybe article we can translate. There's lots of articles and videos every day, and then if someone can Chinese translate to English or English translate to Chinese, and then for exchange, that would be great. But so far, except the commercial, I know the New York Times, they translate the whole newspaper to China, they can see it, but no one like progressive world doing this. So this is a good project. Maybe we can a good funding, or maybe a good volunteers to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I will go now to Bahram and then Sarah.
Thank you for this webinar. I wanted to ask if there are any upcoming conferences, or for instance, this year, because of the World Social Forum in Nepal, individual countries are having their own social forums. Like this weekend, it was in Russia, in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Is there any Chinese social forum, or what are the opportunities for people-to-people exchange? If you can put some information in the chat, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Sarah, you have the last word.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'll start by saying thank you again. I want to go back to, I think it was Carlos's question of is the narrative shifting on China? Are there more opportunities? I think there's no way to measure that until there is a real crisis that engages the population. Now, if you looked a few months back, a majority of the population in the US it was unquestioned, they were supportive of Israel and they accepted the narrative about Palestinian terrorism and whatnot. That has changed. That has changed in a huge way. If you look at even Ukraine, when 2 years ago this week, at the beginning of the special military operation, they said 80%, 90% of the population firmly with Biden, the response was needed, and so on. And now, even in the Congress, and these are the really bought and paid for politicians, it's no longer going that way. And overwhelmingly, the majority of the population is not for more money to the Ukraine. So what changed? What changed? What caused the change? Resistance. Resistance. When there was a real up and down fight, US not only isn't succeeding in the fight on the battlefront, but they almost immediately lose ground at home, because there is an understanding of these 800 military bases around the world, the huge amount of the budget, everything that's left undone here on a gut level. So when it finds expression, it does change. It really does. And I think we should look toward and understand the ability of what's going on underneath and know that resistance does change things in big ways. Also, when there's opposition around the world, it's not reported here. The role of the media is always, the corporate media, is to marginalize people's movements, to say they're unimportant, irrelevant, aren't happening. So you could have the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, 55 countries, back up China on Xinjiang and say they see no genocide, no massacres, no repression there. It's not even a line item. It's not even an article here. So there is a real attempt to distort the movement that really goes on all the time. But we shouldn't lose confidence in it, because explosive movements happen here in solidarity. And that's when we're building those movements, you can actually feel the sea change that breaks through. Now, there was a good question on, is there a peace movement in China? And we can't look for it to be like what's here. Here, people are really fighting against those 800 bases around the world, that military budget. That's not the problem people in China face. China doesn't have 800 bases and the majority of its entire budget spent on war. So where do young, enthusiastic people in China look? They're looking to the countryside for rebuilding, for ending poverty. They're engaged in real programs in China. So it's not a movement so much against the government, but how do they push forward more strongly? There is a whole movement in China against capitalist rotors, against too much privatization. There really is. Li Su-hin explained a lot of that, but we met all kinds of people who were, for, if anything, strengthening the socialist roots of China and demanding more, not less. So look at it as a very different kind of movement. We actually did speak to many people who, English is taught widely in China. So there is a rudimentary understanding. It's not that you can get into fluent conversations, but and I'll say one final thing. I am, as are several of the speakers, members of the United National Anti-War Coalition. There's a national conference happening on April 5 to 7th in Minneapolis. I want to invite people to come because all of these topics are going to be taken up there. It's in solidarity with Palestine, but against all U.S. wars at home. And I want to link that back to the question about what will it take to the people's movement to show solidarity with the indigenous struggle here. And I think it's including it in every conference, every demand, every action, never letting that go. And that is very much a focus of this UNAC conference. So you can find it at unacpeace.org, UNAC peace.org. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Again, a very important intervention, and thanks for telling us all about the conference. Also, so I hope many people will go. And so in closing, let me just say that this kind of effort is really more and more urgent and necessary, and it's important to join the wave that is changing people's perceptions and I think people's political positions in the US and elsewhere. So please do what you can to further this process. Check out Friends of Socialist China at socialistchina.org and the International Manifesto Group at internationalmanifesto.org. And please look out for our mailouts, our next and our future events. So thank you very